Happy Saturday and welcome to the Marketing Madmen. Nick Constantino here, and we have a special episode today. We are going to call this episode Nick Goes to a Therapist for the First Time. And for those who've listened to the show, you've probably heard me spout 1 million different terms that sound like I know what I'm talking about in psychology and therapy. I don't, and now I brought an expert who does. So I have with me Mr. Dave Glick. Dave, how you doing, bud?
Good. Glad to be here.
So Dave is with Triad Psych, but he's got a pretty extensive resume. So before I do what I usually do, which is one of my psychological flaws, and talk over everybody and try to dominate situations, I'm going to let Dave talk and set up his background because it will play nicely into our conversation about the workforce in the next segment. So Dave, why don't you go back as far back as you think relevant and just give us some of this background and how you got into this field and the diversity of what you've seen in the field.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. How did I get where I am? I pretty much came of age in the 80s and, had it drilled in my head that you go to, and I grew up in New Jersey, so had it drilled in my head, you go to college, get a liberal arts degree, then get a job with a money center bank in New York, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
So I attended Boston University, which is very near and dear to my heart still.
Great school.
And is an excellent place. And then, sure enough, did get a job in a money center bank and found out that I hated it.
Yeah.
And they hated me.
Yeah.
So we parted company.
Yeah.
And I was
What was that initial position?
I was an account administrator in private banking at Chase Manhattan Bank.
Got it. Okay.
In Rockefeller Center, New York.
Yeah.
I remember it.
Yeah.
It was very
The
traumatic.
big boys.
It was very traumatic, in fact.
Yeah, why so?
I just couldn't believe that people could be so heartless towards other people and think nothing of it.
Yeah. Heartless is a good word. That being said, it also saves you a lot of time because you don't have to deal with the BS of people being heartless to your back. At least they do it to your face.
They were very much to your face. That is true. I'll give them credit for that. So that did not work out. I then went on a soul-searching journey with a backpack for about a year, going around the planet.
Did you find yourself? Did you find your soul?
I found my soul at the pyramids of Giza.
Cool.
I was looking at the pyramids of Giza and decided I would move back to Boston and become a shrink. Okay. Now, also, my mother, I'm
curious, as a psychologist, what part of seeing pyramids made you think that, or was it just the aha moment?
Well, I want to make it clear, I'm not a psychologist per se. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and psychotherapist. Also, I have a degree in learning and behavioral disabilities. But I think I felt so insignificant looking at those pyramids.
Yeah.
And I figured when we went, it was overrated, overblown, and a big tourist trap. It was a big tourist trap, but to see them, pictures don't do them justice. And if seeing the pyramids doesn't change how you think, nothing will.
Yeah.
So my mother was a therapist, so I decided to move back to Boston and pursue that. And that's when I changed gears.
Yeah. So you were telling me a story about, as far as policing and because that is a huge topic nowadays, is just the police force and the level of what you can do and stop and frisk. And we've had all these countless things. But tell me a little bit about that story of how you were kind of thrown into it really early in your psychotherapy career. Talk about that, what you said with one of your professors.
Well, what happened is, while I was in graduate school, the dean, a man named Ed DeLatra, took me under his wing. He was the dean of the School of Education at the time, former college president. He passed away a couple years ago, unfortunately, but I always want to mention him. He's so wonderful. I'm still close to his widow, Alice. But he took me under his wing, and he invented the field of police ethics.
Yeah,
and
which is insane when you told me the year this was. You thought it was like the 1910s.
It was 1993 that I met him.
So we invented police ethics in 1993. Well,
he wrote the book. I met him. It was invented for me.
Sure, got it.
He had written the first book in the 80s.
Got it, okay.
And I contributed to the final edition, too, before he passed. But then my field placement was at an employee assistance program that did a heavy, extensive work with police departments. The crime bill was passed in '94, and I got very intense experience, and I've always kept my foot in it. And the largest leap I made was in 2006. I became an area clinician for the Drug Enforcement Administration. Okay. And I'm still with them now.
Yeah.
And I have two fields, just to make it clear. I also, because I have the degree in learning and behavioral disabilities in special ed, I do a lot of work with neurodiversity, learning disabilities, autism, ADD as well. So
and I think we'll cover, let's silo those and cover those in segments.
Sure.
So let's go to the DEA now.
Yes,
so, the perceptions on drugs have changed very rapidly. Just from marijuana, MDMA, where people are talking about microdosing LSD. So let's talk about just as a whole, at the DEA, when you're dealing with people, do you find people who the drugs are a coping mechanism for some of their problems? Are they masking? Just talk a little bit about what a person looks like that's coming in with these drug problems. Are the drugs, and I know it's such a loaded question, but I have a brother that deals with something like this, and we're always trying to figure out, did the drugs cause the psychological issues, or were the drugs a manifestation of them? And is it the chicken or the egg? And I know it's a simple way of simplifying it, right. But in what you do, I'm sure you're brought in to look at the other side of it and see what are some of the causes, because you can fix somebody, you can detox them, but if they psychologically want to go back to the same problems. So just talk a little bit about your experience there and what you've seen.
Well, my role at the DEA is to provide support to the agents and related staff, analysts, accountants, everyone who works there. I don't work directly with...
Because they see some stuff.
Right, with people who are directly addicted. They work under intense pressure. So I don't really deal with addictions there. It's more my job to support them if there's a critical incident, or if they're just dealing with work stress. They move around quite a bit. They get transferred. If you have a family, so we're there to provide support so they can adjust better. If you're talking about addictions as a whole in terms of drug use, what I will say firmly is that addiction is just a disorder of attachment. That these outside substances, most people who get very addicted to them, it's because it allows them to attach to other people as a result. So if you are drinking or using drugs, no matter what it is, whatever the drug of choice is, it allows you to get close to other people when sometimes you can't. So whenever we treat addiction as a disorder of attachment, which means connecting to other people in a way that's meaningful, we usually have much better results. For example, AA, no one could understand for almost a century why sitting around and talking with other people who drink could do so much good. It's because it allowed them to attach to other people. I mean, when someone's having a craving for a drink or some other type of narcotic, they call the sponsor, and it's that connection, just speaking to the person, and for some strange reason, the need to use goes away. So it's important to remember, and there's a book, an Atlanta psychologist named Phil Flores wrote a book called Addiction as an Attachment Disorder. So whenever we look at addiction that way, and if you look at World Health Organization and the institutes in DC, they're declaring loneliness as a public health emergency and epidemic, and all of this social media is not helping. This technology is not making people closer. It's making people more socially isolated and alone. And that's a lot of every therapist, I don't care what approach they take, is dealing with that with their patients, that the social isolation, the loneliness, and having people you can connect with in a way that's meaningful is key. So
this is my understanding of it, and please butcher it, because this is a combination of things I've heard, and nothing is official here. So the problem is that when you talk about norepinephrine and serotonin, all those things are what you get from friendship, and they're finding that the people who live the longest, the network of people you have in the friendship is what makes you last the longest. The problem with social media, drugs, all these addiction things is that they're playing on age-old receptors. So they're giving you the dopamine drip.
And social media is a drug in and of itself. So they're giving it's designed to be that way. To keep you there. People who design these online games, with these massive, it's called a massive multiplayer online experience. They hire specialized consultants that keep you on there longer. And the only way to keep you on there longer is to see to it a lot of your human needs are being met.
It's insane. And my understanding is again, that dopamine is, if you go back to cavemen, dopamine is you smell something and it's like, I got to go eat that. So the dopamine is what makes you have that craving, because you're going to go get something that needs like sustenance. And then when you eat it, it's the serotonin that's like, okay, dude, you just ate, you should be happy. What we've created is just the dopamine drip where there's never satisfaction. They're just keeping you hooked on the dopamine part of it. And that's what any kind of drug does, all these things, because you think that the attachment, you're desperately in need of human connection. So you drink, but then all of a sudden the drinking affects the human connection. You don't get it. The serotonin never comes, and you're just caught in this phase where you're back into this dopamine drip.
Now, let me hop in there, because that's important. Is that what people need to remember, and I drill this in my patient's head, is that they don't think they can control their own dopamine levels. They don't think it's something they can manipulate and increase as needed. There's a false perception that using outside substances is the only way to get it. That's simply not true. So
put your phone down. Don't stare at a screen.
Certainly put your phone down.
Go be out in nature, be in sunlight, right? Things like that.
You can. That's something that helps. Anything that forces you to be very much in the moment, where all you can think about is what's in front of you, is going to increase your dopamine levels, especially if it's something you're choosing to do, and if it gives you a feeling of achievement, of competency, If you're connecting with other people in the process, all the better. So, I mean, there's a reason why after a long day at work, if you go to the gym, even if it was a bad day at work, you go to the gym, all of a sudden you're not as affected by it anymore.
Yeah.
Because you are, essentially giving yourself more dopamine, endorphins, and things that help with that. So it's important that people understand that they're really in control of their dopamine levels, and they can boost them by not taking anything that's harmful for themselves either. If, you look at someone who you like that's really successful, well put together, they know that on a certain level. Now the current buzzword is self-care.
Yeah.
And it's one of the better fads in mental health.
Yeah.
That the mental health field is very fad driven.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah,
I think keeping track of your own sleep and stress levels is incredibly, and I think just the knowledge, like I wear this Fitbit now. In January, I always do a no booze, no coffee month. And what you find is that everyone's like, oh, why don't you drink? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, because I sleep, I'm usually getting 70s and now I'm getting 90s in my sleep score. My stress level, my readiness level, everything bounds. And I'll say, talk about dopamine. So I decided one of the things I would do is I'd wake up at 5:30 in the morning every day and I'd go to the gym. Didn't matter if I didn't get sleep last night. And in nights where you get 3 hours of sleep and you don't go to the gym, you feel like crap.
Absolutely.
But just going to the gym and starting that process actually adjusts your body to some dimension that you actually feel fine for the day.
Well, more and more studies are coming out. Something we always knew, but it's becoming better crystallized, is the mental health benefits of movement.
Yeah.
And now that we have deeper scans and better analysis tools.
Bone density is one of those big ones that shows your lifetime. So, well, and look, this is kind of where I wanted this conversation to go. I think in the next segment, we're going to do some practical application to people in the workplace and what you're seeing in the workplace, because I think that's really beneficial. So you've been listening to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3, and we will be right back. Welcome back to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3. Nick Constantino here with Dave Glick, and we're going to continue our conversation. Let's go away now. Let's start talking about where we are today. We talked about social media. We talked about drugs. I think that there are people, I heard a great line that said, busyness has become a way of life. Like, we have to keep so busy. Everyone's running around. I had parents that immigrated here, and my grandmother, 99 years old to this day, never drove a car because she lived in New York and she didn't have to. She's never driven a car. She's never had a driver's license. She's never driven a car. And that woman is the cool as a cucumber for every day of her life. She cooks at home. She has her own garden. She lives in this bubble, and she is more than content being in. So I'm going to start with a broad question. We can start with a broad answer, and then we'll deep into it. Is the mental health crisis in the workplace, in the family life today, as bad as the media and the companies trying to get you to buy stuff make you believe it is?
Yes.
Okay. So that's an easy answer. So yes, it's bad getting worse. Yes, it's been building up over the past decade. Give me a time frame when you think this really kicked in.
It's bad getting worse.
Okay. And what do you think the primary factors are that has made it worse? And what do you think we as a society have done to allow it to get to this point?
There's a lot of different factors that come to play that affect mental health. From my perspective, and I want to make it clear, I'm not a university researcher or anything like that. I'm in the field.
A university researcher would have to get this paper peer-reviewed 45 times before it gets published, and it would already change already. So I love professors, but their pace is ridiculous for what the world really needs. Right. And if you listen to peer-reviewed papers from 4 years ago, they're already completely irrelevant. So I appreciate what they do, but I'd rather get the practical, real-world application.
So I want to make it clear. I mean, I've got 2 boots in the mud.
Yeah.
I'm in the community. My practice locations are in mostly working class areas, so we don't have a typical patient or a typical client. So we see it all. But strictly speaking from my perspective, all right, so I want to qualify things that way. And I'm ready to defend that.
Yeah.
Is I feel that there are several factors, and I'll tell you the ones I think are the most prominent. One is the advent of high-speed internet.
Okay.
That I remember when I had a service called Prodigy in 1994. Yep. And I would come home in Boston, and before I took my coat off, I would log into Prodigy.
Do the phone line.
Right. It would take me, all the sound and all that, which I miss. I have to get a phone ringtone that does that. But maybe in 10 minutes, I'd be online.
Yeah.
But
if someone didn't need the phone.
Right. If someone didn't need to make a phone call. Right. I'd tie up the phone line. So with the advent of high-speed internet, it being so responsive, and then with companies and other players making it more and more responsive to your needs, which originated with the gaming companies. That's really where it originated, but that's bled into all technology now. The cell phones becoming so efficient and so vivid and lifelike too, was one. And that's something that people were no longer going out and seeing other people either. I mean, there was a movie with Sandra Bullock, no one talks about it anymore, called The Net. And when that came out in the 90s, she was ordering a pizza online, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's impossible. But of course, that's all we do now. But that's cutting down human interaction. That I don't go to the post office anymore.
Yeah.
And I just do it all from my laptop or computer. Who even uses snail mail that much?
Yeah.
But I realize now going to the post office, I'd bump into colleagues, I'd bump into friends as well. So we're seeing much more social isolation for one. And that just keeps creeping and creeping and creeping to where now it's not going to change.
Yeah.
That's with us for good. So that was one thing. Another major factor from my perspective was the ability of people to work from home too.
Yep.
So that also brought people away from each other. Also leads to a decline in social skills that we know people on a keyboard are much more likely to instigate a fight to seeing someone right to their face. Bullying, for example. I gave an interview a long time ago to the Daily Dot that in my generation, you know, if you were bullied, which I was, when I got home, I got a reprieve from it. Kids who are bullied now, there's no boundary.
Yeah.
The bullies can get to them at home through the computers and social media as well.
Yeah.
So I think that was a big part of it as well. All of the technology breaking down our boundaries.
Yeah.
You know, structure binds anxiety. And if I lose my structure, I have more anxiety.
Yeah.
Furthermore, we see so many changes to the economy that there is no job security. There will not be job security again.
Now, but that being said, that goes both ways too, because now the employees aren't loyal to the. If you look, I got a brother in New York. He's 35 years old. I mean, his resume is a year and a half at 20 different places, but he keeps getting jobs in this field by new people and just moving around. So it goes both ways, also.
It goes both ways, but for some people, and especially for families, that's very hard.
Yeah.
That how many times we see people having to move from where they are because they have to take a job.
They go away from their family network. Sure. They go away from the tribe. It takes a tribe to raise a kid. Yeah.
Sure. So, it goes both ways, but there are winners and losers, and people who are losers from that have to deal with the toll from that. So that's one piece of it as well. The other piece, I think right now, jumping to where we are today, I think also the rate of change in society, things that used to take years can now be done in months, if not days.
Yeah. And AI is going to only speed that up.
AI is only going to speed that up. So things are changing at such a rapid pace, and change usually creates stress.
Yeah.
So I think also the rate of change that people are having to deal with right now is affecting people's mental health in a negative way. And COVID really, really was a major factor in depression, anxiety, suicide rates as well. So there is a mental health crisis. It is very real.
Yeah.
And I don't feel it's being overblown at all.
Yeah, and one of the ways I say this, and I feel like we are getting closer and closer to like the Gilded Age, where you had the Rockefellers and the Carnegies. They would do anything in the earth for the sake of profit. People would die in these shops, and I feel like we've gotten so happy and so caught up in this AI and social media that we are allowing these companies to get away with murder. And if you look at the mental health crisis and the suicide rates and the young girls, and it used to be that it was the kid that like hid in the closet that was committing suicide. Now it's the prettiest girl in the school that's committing suicide because she's being bullied, and it's coming to the forefront, but we're so deep in.
But think about how many more opportunities you now have to bully. That, I grew up, mostly in the 80s. I'm 56. And like I said, it all had to be face-to-face.
Yeah.
Maybe you'd get crank phone calls.
Yeah.
That was the only way someone could really invade, and the night before Halloween.
Yeah, but then your mother can pick up the phone and say,
and yell at them.
And I'll talk to your mother, and that stops real quick.
Away. And, the night before Halloween was Goosey Night. That was where it began and ended, pretty much.
Yeah.
But we're in a very different environment right now as well, where we can't even know what our kids are often being exposed to, too.
Yeah.
With their phones.
And there's so many freaking workarounds, and some of it, like my wife and I are pretty good, right? The tablet, you get an hour a day. If we're busy, we're in front of you watching it. And even kids' YouTube. Part of the problem is it's ridiculous what they're watching. They're watching other people play with toys. Like, this is what you should be watching on television. Like, who knows what these kids, what parameters? And it's all these algorithms, but for every algorithm, there's another algorithm trying to figure out what the algorithm will allow you to say and speed influence.
I had a case where a young man started leaning towards a lot of white supremacy, white supremacist type tropes and such, and the mother brought him in, single mom. And where is he getting it? I don't know where this is coming from. Turns out he had his own YouTube account, and that has And that was the grooming process that he was being approached through YouTube by these people. So I'm right. We can't always control what they're being exposed to and what's happening. As well. Also, to be honest with you, that the insurance companies are much better than they were in dealing with mental health, but they still don't always make it easy. That mental health has always been the first place to look to cut costs. We go through periods like during COVID where they were much more generous and open-handed, but we're constantly dealing with almost a degree of harassment from some insurance companies that prevent us from providing care. So,
so that, you know what, let me say one quick point, but I think, actually, let me cover this now. So I think a hard thing to do, like if you have a gunshot wound, it is easy to diagnose a gunshot wound, right? I think mental health is really hard to diagnose. And please, I elaborate, like, how do you mitigate fraud? How do you, I mean, if you think about just murderers, every one of them just pleads insanity, right? Whether they're insane or not. And look, you have to be insane to kill somebody, I get it. But how do you mitigate fraud if in this mental health crisis, if there are so many bad actors that take advantage of these things and just use these words? And look, it happens in the workplace. Everybody that's listening to this probably has a person who works for them who has taken 12 mental health days. Really, they drank too much the night before and their head hurts and they take a mental health day now. How do you mitigate fraud? I don't want to defend the insurance companies because they're horrible, just even if you've seen your rates recently. How do you mitigate fraud and how do you validate mental health issues in the world today? And look, Adderall and Xanax and these doctors are so willing to give prescriptions. How do you mitigate fraud and how do you diagnose these people?
Well, people have been hiding behind diagnoses or different causes from the beginning of time. I mean, it goes back to the Hebrews in Sinai, who Moses didn't come back soon enough, so they built an idol. Moses came back, was very angry. Well, it's not our fault. It's the idol that made us do it.
Of course it is.
The gilded calf or whatever they made. So it's important to remember that not much really changes. We put different labels on it. But this has been going on since the beginning of time in one form or another. But what we do in terms of trying to find, and what you're talking about is also known as malingering, or someone faking a diagnosis or has to have a diagnosis. But a trained, seasoned clinician can look at the behaviors and see if the behaviors are consistent with the diagnosis. That there are certain behaviors you would exhibit if you were, for example, you had bipolar disorder. If there's no sleep disorder present, we don't make that diagnosis. But in these cases like you're talking about where it becomes chronic, we have excellent instruments, psychological testing, things like the MMPI, which is the standard.
And are you testing neurochemical levels and stuff like that? What are they testing? The stress responses?
You don't need to go so deep that you're drawing blood or anything. That these instruments are norm referenced. They're very good. And it looks more at personality traits by asking them various questions that are very benign, but it's based on a profile. So we have these really good instruments that we use.
Got it.
And
is it the control against yourself? So do you have your own control metric and then
the test does. I don't. The test does.
The test has a baseline.
The test does. And now a lot of the tests one benefit of technology is you can give them a lot easier and a lot faster than you used to.
That I believe.
They don't have to always be expensive. For example, a test we give in my practice is the SASE, the Subtle Substance Abuse Screening Inventory. Very quick, very dirty, but very, very good, very effective as well. And it looks for deception, it looks for lying. So in terms of someone who's trying to use a diagnosis as an excuse, a seasoned clinician will know how to spot that. And if someone is going out on disability, for example, the insurance companies, they have the right to do this, and to their credit, they usually do require some testing, some valid testing. Then a psychologist, a testing psychologist, reviews it to make sure that the test wasn't faked per se.
Got it.
As well. So we have safeguards in place as well. But it's important to have seasoned quality people. It's also important to remember that training for mental health professionals is no longer really cookie cutter, that there are so many different programs, online programs, different fields of thought, different types of therapy, different ways of approaching things. So it also depends on the qualifications of the clinician you have.
And I think, again, I'll go back to the line you have. If someone's looking for help and really wants help, there's plenty of places to find help.
Sure, there are plenty of places to find help. But again, the cost, there are a lot of variables that come into play as to the quality of care too. At our clinic, we've always been, quality care at a fair price. but which has worked for us for a long time. But still, despite that, sometimes we will have insurance companies who make it very difficult for us to operate as well. So despite that, us having a very modest type practice.
Right, you're working within the parameters of the insurance company versus the insurance company working in the parameters of the experts in these fields, which is a shame, and that's capitalism.
I have been a part of some of the best programs I've been a part of, though. Of course, they were very well funded, and they let the clinicians set the parameters, and they came in behind us. So it really depends.
Yeah.
But that's all economics.
There's going to probably be papers done on the efficiency rates of those versus which way it works. And look, like you said, there's been fraud since the beginning of time. We're in a relatively new stage where people are even talking about mental health. If you think about the past decade, in the lexicon of 10 years is not a long time. And I know things are moving fast, but I think these are all things that will balance out. I do have one question before I want to go to some tips for the workplace, because I think it's more important for the workplace. My understanding is that one of the biggest problems with social media is that, again, you said things don't change. If we go back to, again, caveman, Neanderthal, any of these things, our brains are wired to respond more to negative stimuli than positive stimuli. And that's because it's easier to know to run away from a bear attacking you than it is to pick up a piece of fruit. And that what social media has done is exacerbated the bad. So the negative qualities of people, and they attach more to the negative. So if you look there, when you look at a staunch Democrat, there's more of them talking about bashing Republicans and them talking about their own ideals as Democrats. It is always a negative connotation, and the algorithms amplify that, and that's how they keep people hooked. Any soundness to that? Is that principles that are spoken about? I just feel like everything's so negative driven and insult driven that no one's talking about the positives anymore.
Right. Well, one thing you always have to remember, and it's always been this way, is if it bleeds, it leads. That nothing's going to get your attention more than something that's negative or threatening, especially to your well-being.
Yeah.
Then we have these algorithms which can amplify that and put it on steroids. We're living in a very perception-driven world. And to me, that is a very, very scary thing.
Yeah.
That people are making decisions affecting people's lives without doing any fact-finding or a deep dive. People are hopping on fads and trends without examining them, and it's causing a lot of problems and a lot of trouble. And this is part of what's causing some of the mental health crisis besides all these other factors. I'm spending probably about 20% of my patients, the work I'm doing with them is helping them defend themselves against an adverse decision made against them at usually at work that was not based in any facts or evidence.
Okay.
But a perception.
Can you give me an example? You don't have to say names, obviously, but could you give me an example?
I'm finding people, whether they're blue collar, white collar, C-suite, or everything in between, that if someone points a finger and makes an accusation, it becomes reality. And so one thing for any good leader, if you have a toxic work environment, as far as I'm concerned, I don't really embrace modern buzzwords and such. I'm a traditionalist. I like going way back to the classics. That tells me that they're poorly led. Yeah. And that, I mean, going back to the origin of this, I think in the 90s, with the advent of free, easy, and cheap data, led to this, that management by metrics is not always the best management. Yeah. And that's a big problem with everything nowadays, okay? Absolutely.
So the balance between, I call it art and science, right? We have removed the gut feeling. We have removed,
absolutely.
And if you think, let's talk about some of the advertising. Thank God you set me up for advertising. So we're gonna have a marketing talk on the marketing Madmen. So one of the problems with the marketing world these days is we're so data driven that we don't understand data cannot talk about an emotional connection. No. You can't use numbers to explain emotional connection. And I think what you're talking about, culture and toxicity, quitting rates, that doesn't show toxicity. It's how people feel. And there's no data that can monetize or quantify how people feel.
Well, I do a lot of organizational consulting too. And, oftentimes when I'm brought in now, they say, well, our metrics are terrific, but why are we having such high turnover? Why are we getting sued? What's the failure here? And unfortunately, again, an over-reliance on metrics, not enough training in leadership. For example, I have an office near a major university here in town with a very prestigious MBA program. And their ethics class is a 4-hour seminar on a Saturday. That's it. And the leadership class is taught by someone who's never led people at all. It's just very abstract. So I then see, I think this university should hire me or pay me extra because I take these students and give them what they need.
Yeah.
So there's no, the concept of group psychology doesn't exist anymore in most companies. They're not aware of it.
Yeah.
And it's only the older people like me who still talk about
Which
it.
is insane because you just talked about how one of the reasons to get over a lot of these things is the connection portion of it. So if you're in a room and you see, oh my God, all these people think the same as me, aren't you more likely to heal and be better if you see people sharing common problems? Yeah, look, I think it's crazy. I think one of the problems is...
Well, let me make something clear, and for anyone who's listening, is that being a good leader has very little to do with what you know and everything to do with who you are as a person. Yeah. Very little to do with what you know, everything to do with who you are. And I'm going to give myself a plug. I do a lot of executive coaching too.
Yeah.
And most of the larger executive coaches, coaching companies don't want me. I do this independently, and it's because I'm not just going to rely on metrics. Yeah. And I believe any good executive coaching, or any kind of like management development program, if character development isn't part of that, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
I mean, think about all these people we send to these leadership seminars, camps, retreats, and they can't lead flies to a piece of poop. That's why it's about your character.
Yeah, but I would bet that the reason is because they want someone to train them to be leaders within their own company and not leaders in general, because they don't want them to leave. So if they teach them in the parameters to which they set, they think, which is the opposite of what the truth is. You're actually driving people away because you're working. Look, one of the I don't like using sports references because this is a sports station. We use them a lot, but ultimately, the best players never make the best coaches, and the best coaches never make the best managers and owners. And there's a reason for that, because when you're a player, it's about you. It's about you, and then all of a sudden it's about the other. So just reinforcing what you say, there's a reason that exists. Michael Jordan was never going to coach. Shoot, he can't even be an owner, right? Like the Hornets suck, the Bobcats sucked for a reason. So I think that's been proven, and sports is one of those mediums that really just confirms what you're saying. Right,
Bill Parcells, whether you like him or not, can lead. He can lead.
People would follow him. And that's part of leading is people will follow.
And, Pete Carroll can lead too, but he has a very different approach.
Yeah.
Pete Carroll's more humanistic. His players will lay on railroad tracks for him.
Yeah.
And I was happy when he was on with the Patriots briefly, but I did like that.
Yeah.
But so... I'm sorry, we lost the question.
Yeah, no. Honestly, we're just talking in general. And I think one of you talk about leadership, and just one of the things is when it becomes about, so let's generational, right? What generations need from work has changed.
Absolutely.
I mean, and I lead a team of about 10 people, and it is from 60s to 20s. Right. And one of the problems is, again, these keywords and these buzzwords, and people think that they're making change and want to make change, but don't really want to go through the effort or do anything.
Correct.
They want to just go the illusion of change.
Correct.
But the money motivating of the 80s and the baby boomers who worked hard, come home, right?
And Gen X.
And Gen X. But most of those people, to be fair, women weren't even in the workplace to the percentage they are now. So that was, my job is to take care of this family. I keep the lights on. My wife makes sure the kids go to school and blah, 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 blah. Now you fast forward, and I can't tell you the amount of people I meet who the wife is making more money than the husband.
Very
so
common.
Their motivations are so different.
Let me pause there. You talk about what affected mental health, and that's another important point. What I saw during the Great Recession, around that 2008 time, was, especially here in Atlanta with the housing bust, I always said that if we lose housing in Atlanta, we're in a lot of trouble, because every third person you met was tied to the housing industry, it seemed to me.
Wow.
Back then. And then we saw a lot of men become unemployed, but their wives kept their jobs. And they were in fields that weren't as vulnerable to economic swings, nursing, teaching.
Got it.
And a lot of women in the professions now, as nursing and teaching are too. And that created, I noticed, a lot of anger for men. They felt very emasculated.
Yeah, this election proved that. A lot of that stuff has caught up with us.
I think the last election was just a referendum on social class and on masculinity. Yeah, both, too. I agree with it strongly.
Yeah, well, and that, look, that's why we're having this conversation. Sure. So we're going to get back, and I'm going to ask you to give me a nice diagnosis in the 22 to 30 minutes we've spent with each other.
Okay.
And then we're going to talk a little bit about tips in the workplace, whether you work for someone or somebody works for you, and ways ways you can really take a step back, take a breath, relax, and go and just progress in your career. Because I think there's also as much opportunity as there's ever been in the workforce. I think if you are the kind of person who puts your head down, gets your work done, there's ways you can position yourself better in your company. But
it takes more than hard work. This is a lot of the work I do. You have to constantly be ready to pivot, and you have to know how to pivot smart.
Yes.
But unfortunately, and this is sad, is that hard work is only half the battle.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to talk about. Because the other side of it is, I also think that there's a lot of sayers and not a lot of doers.
Correct.
There's a lot of strategy people, but no one wants to get their hands dirty and do it.
Nobody wants to do it.
So we're going to finish this discussion up with Dave Glick. You've been listening to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3. Nick Constantino here with Dave Glick of Triad Psych, and we have covered a lot as we usually do. And prior to starting this segment in the break, I think Mr. Glick diagnosed me with ADD. So because this is my first time ever with a therapist, I am going to ask so far, sir, in the 35 minutes that we spoke, what's your diagnosis of me? Don't hold any punches, bud.
Well, in poker, you don't show your hand immediately.
Fair.
Based on what I've seen, it's a possibility.
Yeah. Okay.
But I would never diagnose you in 30 minutes. But let me, since it's your first time with a shrink.
Yeah, please.
There's some core questions we have to answer.
Let's do it.
First. Okay, Nick, are you getting your needs met?
Yes.
Tell me more.
I have a good family. I have a good job. I have connections with people all over the place. I've been on a pretty good health kick. I sleep well. I wake up. My family around when I was young is still close, even though they're far away. So, yeah, my needs are met.
You're happy?
Happy.
Okay, good. Yeah, you answered the question well. That's actually the most dangerous question you can ever ask anybody.
Because everyone perceives what needs are differently?
No, to say to someone, are you getting your needs met, is really a very explosive, loaded question, and you don't know. Some people you ask that, and the other can't answer it.
I would go into more details about my wife and I.
Nick,
oh, he's going into it. I feel like Nick, I'm on the couch now.
Nick, put on your quiet hat. And, okay.
Got it.
All right. Do you want some Adderall or Ritalin?
No, I'm good right now.
But, asking someone, are you getting your needs met, is really a very dangerous question. And a lot of people don't know what their needs are. And also, we're living in a time right now where people are struggling to get their needs met.
Okay.
And this has been going on for quite a long time because of changes in society and the economy. So that's a big part of the work any good therapist will do, no matter what their approach is, are we looking at, and, I'm also a certified employee assistance professional. So there we're supposed to work on, psychology related to the job in its pure form. And, are you getting your needs met at work, too? It's a good question to ask as well.
Yeah.
Good bosses ask that. One of the best bosses I ever had, when I came into work for him, Joe, if you're listening, I'm talking about you. He said to me, where do you want to be in 5 years? And he was the clinical director, and I was an assistant clinical director. And I was afraid to tell the truth, because what I really wanted to do was be a clinical director. And he wouldn't take a canned answer. He kept probing, and he said, well, do you want to be a clinical director someday? I said, well, yes, I do. And I was afraid he'd be threatened by that because that was his job.
Yeah.
But what he did is he gave me a lot of tasks and a lot of assignments that gave me the training I needed to become a clinical director. And he was clearly a very secure boss. And sure enough, when the politics at the company started going against him, and I was approached to maybe take his job, I said, absolutely not.
Yeah.
I said, go talk to somebody else, not me. We're still close. I mean, that was
But I think
over 30 years ago.
Loyalty is a hard word, but he instilled loyalty in you.
Absolutely.
And that's a hard word these days. It really is a hard word, loyalty.
It's a very hard word. And, there's a lot of... Loyalty has a different definition also based on your generation.
Yeah.
That we're seeing this intergenerational conflict. I remember I gave a management seminar 12, maybe even 15 years ago. And someone said, what do you think of all the different generations in the workforce? And back then I said, right now we have 5 generations in the workforce at once, which has never happened before in our history. Now that was 10 years ago. There has been some changing, but we still have different generations coming at things from very different perspectives as well.
Yeah, and I think that needs some change, because the difference between me as the geriatric, as they say, millennial, and the youngest millennial
about what,
is
41,
stark.
42?
42 is stark, the difference between a
very much
42-year-old and a 30-year-old. I mean, it is
much so.
insanity, the difference. And I think a lot of it, look, millennial, the term was the people who came of age at 2000, and that is exactly me. I graduated high school in the year 2000. So I think that's required. I do think, one of the things about being a boss that I had to learn, that was the hardest thing, is the natural inclination is, I understand this, why can't you? Or I figured this out, why are you not getting this? And it is super dangerous. That is one of the most toxic things you can do, is just assume that everybody does things, has the motivations and does things. And I think that is why a lot of those players don't meet those needs.
One way to address that, what I do in my seminars and my classes, is I hold up a picture. Are you familiar with the ink blot test you see in the movies, the Rorschach? Okay. So I hold up a fake Rorschach picture. It's not really from the Rorschach.
Yeah.
And I say, without talking to your neighbor, no communication, write down what you see in this picture.
Yeah.
Then I take it down. And I go around the room, and everyone has to tell me what they saw. And there was some clustering, but everyone saw something different.
Yeah.
And I explained, you all saw the exact same image in the exact same environment for the exact same period of time, but everyone perceived it differently.
Yeah.
And I said, that's where we get into trouble, if we assume everyone's going to perceive things the way we do. And again, we're living in a very perception-driven world. I cannot stress enough how damaging and harmful that is as well. So a good boss is never perception-driven. A good boss is factual, believes in evidence. And I don't care what generation you're from. I don't care about the changes in technology. I don't want to hear about your new fad. I mean, for me, I can't work for someone who's 100% perception-driven. I understand there's a need to manage perceptions, but when things get serious, evidence and facts have to matter. And I don't care who you are, what you do. You'll find that if you approach things that way, a lot of inter-office conflict dies down.
Yeah.
That if you have someone who's a troublemaker in the office, knowing that they're going to be held to the fire to back up what they say and how they said it, that if you have an office based on specifics, a lot of your problems are going to fade away. Your politics will become much more benign. It's just, the issue is, I think the issue isn't that people it's not they don't want to be that way. It's that we're living in a world where we're constantly being assaulted with too much information.
Yeah.
And people don't have the time to pause and stop and think.
Yeah.
A lot of my clients or patients or coaching, whatever you want to call them, who get into trouble, it's because they were moving at light speed and they failed to read the contract. They failed to properly investigate. Yeah. They failed to get all the facts before they made a decision, and now the situation's become amplified and worse. Yeah. So, if you're listening to me, maybe you don't like me, maybe you don't believe in shrinks, that's fine, but I'm begging you, please press the pause button and really do a deep dive and look at things carefully before you make a decision. I think one of the things, and where I've seen some success in my career, and it might be the Northeasterner, the New Yorker in me, but I think to be somebody who is transparent and who is with fact-driven, you also have to be able to rip the Band-Aid off pretty quick. And you have to be able to have hard conversations, and you have to be able to do it and then explain why and then be done with it. Because I agree with you, but all I ask is before you have that difficult conversation, have your facts first. Yeah. All I'm saying is don't come to a fact fight with a bag of opinions. Yeah. Have your facts first. That's all I ask is for fact finding. Do you find it funny that when we talked about high-speed internet, we are at a world where we can have any bit of information at our fingertips if you really want to look for it, and we are using information less than we ever have because we're using perception. We're using social media. We're not using, look, there's information on GDP growth, and politicians fight about this. Who raised up more debt? These are factual numbers that you can look up that they have to put out, but it's still spun every way to next Tuesday. So we're in a world where you can get this information, but people choose whether they're, whether they're psychologically wired to not get this information, but they almost seem that they don't want to see the real information. Well, it's what I tell people, and I defend this, is that there's a difference between an internet search and research. Yeah. They're two different things. Yeah. So, again, if you're getting information from the internet, is it norm referenced? Yeah. Is it from, and now we're seeing with AI, a lot of the peer review stuff is being faked. That it's destroyed, this has destroyed a lot of the intellectual integrity, which is really critical to, our world working right. And for mental health people, this is a lot of the distress people are in and what causes it. Yeah. So
we've ripped through this, so we are going to go off air on the radio show, and we're going to have a quick catch up on the podcast version, and we're just going to talk through some more tips and things, and we're going to do a kind of rapid fire style because I've enjoyed the conversation. So, Dave, as far as the radio goes, thank you for joining us.
It was my pleasure, and it was an honor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've been listening to Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3. Catch us on the podcast. All right, welcome back to the Marketing Madmen. We are off air. We are on podcast version. Nick got his first psychological diagnosis from a therapist, and we're going to have some. Let's do a little rapid fire. So, what is your advice to an older 62-year-old that is at the end of their
First
career?
and foremost, I have not diagnosed you with anything. I'm just seeing some pointers. But what's clear to me is you're a very high-functioning guy. And even if you have the condition I mentioned, you clearly leverage it to where you benefit from it and do well with it. So it's become one of your greatest assets. That, remember, I mean, not only do I consult and work in the special education space, I came out of the special education system.
Wow.
So when Wall Street or private banking kicked me out, I turned that into my profession, and it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. And it's, if I could meet the VP at Chase Manhattan who canned me 35 years ago, I would have thanked him now.
Yeah.
Just thank you, because I got out of it and do something I love. So it's a great way. We turn adversity into triumph.
Yeah.
As much as we can.
Yeah, and I appreciate you fact-checking me and saying the right things. But look, the workplace has changed. We've covered so many reasons it has. And what I want to do, let's talk some practical advice. So one of the age demographics that I've seen that has the hardest right time right now is late 50s, really to early 60s. They're near the end of retirement, but their skill set that they've learned doesn't match the salaries to which they're being paid. They tend to be people who look backwards and say, look at all this I've done for you, but the employers don't care. They want forward-looking, and give advice to that person because that is one I interact with all the time, and they seem like they are the most down, and they don't want to take jobs for less, and then they think they can go into retirement funds, and then they end up at 67 years old having to work again because they burned through the retirement. So let's throw that one out and give some advice in what you've seen with that age group.
It's deeply personal to me, to be honest with you. I can't just speak about it professionally.
Okay.
And we'll turn this into a therapy session for me.
Please.
That, as a young Jewish guy in the Northeast, declaring that I was going to get a master's in social work and special education.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you the criticism I took in the flack.
Yeah.
But ironically, it was the best thing I ever did. I've never known unemployment. I don't think I ever will. Now, will I face some issues because of my age? And absolutely talking about what you're saying. But, I mean, my old subdivision, there were a lot of men who were wonderful people. They were my friends who were my age. And they got bachelor's degrees, and they figured corporate America would take care of them. They're unemployed, and they'll never really work professionally again.
Yeah.
And, I would drive to work every day to see them in T-shirts and jeans, just looking depressed. So it's a horrible thing to have happen. Now, back to your point, is that you have to understand, again, leverage what you've got. And we're in an economy where you can be made obsolete very easily, as I can be made obsolete. But for the people who will listen, and there's something called resistance in psychotherapy, that someone can come to a coach or a therapist and say, I'll do anything to overcome this problem, please help me. And then when you start offering solutions, they'll do everything they can not to do it.
Yeah.
So it's called resistance. But the key is to update your skills so you can pivot very quickly. And we have a wonderful technical college system here in Georgia where you can pick up these really wonderful skills in a short period of time at a very low cost. And some of the programs are free as well.
Yeah, Google offers them, all these AI institutes.
Google
you can learn
does.
This stuff.
The Georgia Technical College system has 13 certificate programs that are free. It doesn't get any better than that. Now, I've probably mentioned them 1,000 times.
Yeah.
I've had maybe 2 actually take me up on it and go. But, picking up one of these, whether now the keyword is AI, just something that's in very high demand. I had a man who was a very successful logistics VIP, but who was making too much money, was older, was laid off. He didn't fall for the fallacy from headhunters, don't ever trust them, that, we'll get you a new job in 6 months. He became certified in HVAC, which is the heating, heating, ventilation,
air conditioning. Yeah.
Right, because people, whether the economy is good or bad, you're going to need it no matter what.
Yeah.
So then he took a job as one of those people who comes to your house and change the filter.
Face-to-face interaction, you're outside more.
Face-to-face interaction. But they started noticing, the higher-ups, that he was getting a lot more done than anyone else. And the customer feedback was off the chain, how he presented, how he took care of things. So finally, they moved towards, well, we think we want to promote you. And then he said, how did you even get here? And so cutting to the chase, they put him in charge of one of the regions of Atlanta. He's making more than he made in corporate America, and he's happier than he's ever been.
Responding to adversity.
Right. So again, what I will tell you is, don't be afraid of going back to school or picking up some type of technical trade or whatever is in high demand, that you can, as long as you can get into the organization. If you are older, you have something no one talks about anymore, and it's called wisdom.
Yeah.
It's called emotional intelligence. The social skills that younger generations often struggle with, social skills, because they always had screens. I remember a time when there were no screens. And I remember the importance of relationships. And you can't put a price on that.
Yeah.
So my point is, though, leverage your wisdom, but you may have to be willing to change your clothes. You may have to be willing to change your tie.
Yeah.
And it may involve, taking some classes, going back to school. What I tell patients, too, if it's for work, you can take it off your taxes sometimes.
Yeah.
That's a big incentive when I tell people that. So, again, keep your skills fresh and then lean on your wisdom.
Now, one thing I will say, when I hear wise about people or anything, the one thing I don't associate with is ego. So when you say use your wisdom, part of your wisdom is you got to get this ego out of the way.
You can't have wisdom without humility.
Yeah, I love it.
You can't have wisdom without humility. It's just that simple.
I think it's a great piece of advice. We're going to go to the other side of the spectrum now, and we are going to go to a 23-year-old, fresh out of college from this watered-down education system that thinks they know everything and think that they deserve to make $80,000 a year because they have a college degree. What advice do you give to that person? Maybe they had a year or two under their belt. Maybe they're right out of college. What advice do you give to that person of how to deal with the higher-ups who are of a different age demographic or age range than you are? What advice do you have for them?
Well, I have a relatively large staff. I have a staff of about 12 or 13 people composed of full-time, part-time, administrative, back office support and the such. But, for me, in the way I can only speak for myself and, what my mentors did to me, and I had amazing mentors. Yeah. Not many of whom are still alive anymore, I'm sad to say.
Unfortunately.
Which is still very painful for me. That character development was always at the core of everything we did. And character development can be painful at times. So if I have someone like you're talking about, I'm going to get in their face and say, look, you don't have the right to be asking for this. Now, do you really want to get ahead? Do you want to be mentored? Do you want to grow? Are you conflict avoidant? I must say, that I think whether or not someone can survive this type of feedback, this type of leadership development, much of it has to do with the parents. That the younger people like you're talking about, and I get them as patients too. Yeah. Very, very much as patients. Yeah. And you got to remember, someone who's 23 was around for COVID, couldn't go to school. Yeah. And that's been a second factor on them too. Yeah. Believe it or not, I think that the way they were raised was greatly affected by 9/11. Yeah. And then COVID came along, which didn't help
I think it's also when they were, so I was in 2007, I was 5 years into my career. I was living in Vegas. Like, I didn't care that there was a great recession. My intentions of Vegas was just to make enough money to go out and party. But people who are a little bit older, in their 30s and late 20s, that saw that great recession, it really changed their lives.
The impact of the it's interesting because I've had staffing issues with millennials, and it became, and I want to make it clear because I know they're listening, the guys who are with me are wonderful. I'm not talking about you.
Yeah. John, we're not talking about you,
it's
John.
It's funny because one of them's named John. No, one of them is named John.
Right. So I promise we're not talking about you, John.
John, you're an Army veteran. You've put your life on the line.
Oh, now I'm going after a vet. Oh, my goodness.
John, you're fine. But and stop telling your patients to drop and do 20, will you?
Yeah.
But
get some exercise, though.
Right. He's in excellent shape. Good. I got to say that. But But what we saw was that millennials' parents grew up with no job security for the most part. That my parents, that was the end. It ended with the 1990 recession pretty much.
Yeah.
But the message a lot of millennials got from their parents is you can act in any way you want with your employer because they're really not loyal to you.
Wow.
And where it comes from is their own trauma. You know, trauma can be passed down to different generations.
Consciously or subconsciously.
Right, and it's usually subconsciously. So that message really is prominent that you don't owe your employer anything. So we're adapting our hiring practices as well, and to adapt to that too.
Yeah, it's crazy. So my dad worked for the city for his whole life. So he started with the city, worked for the city, and it was the opposite. If I ever told him I was leaving a job, he goes, "What's wrong with you? Stay there as long as you can." He's like, "I'm not saying move, but stay there as long as you can."
Let's circle back to something else. You talked about people who don't switch jobs, they're older and they stay. They don't. You said, well, they won't make as much money.
Yeah,
but
that is fact. That if you're in the same industry and you move, you would make more money because each time you have a...
That is a fact, but there are other facts too. And what we know is after a certain amount of money, and it's different for every person, it's based on your region, people put as much weight on autonomy as they do on money.
There's a law of diminishing returns on salary.
Right, so I've had more patients who are coaching clients who told me they didn't need to see me anymore because they got that promotion. 6 months later, they're back and they're saying, "I hate this. I'm micromanaged every day. They can keep the extra money.
Yeah.
But this micromanagement is, and the reason you don't like it is it encroaches on your autonomy. To be happy, either at work or at home or any environment, there's three things you need: autonomy, competency, and relatedness, okay?
Yeah.
Relatedness is interacting with other people in a way that is meaningful.
Yeah.
We all can interact.
Yeah.
But if there's no meaning, so what?
Yeah, and my understanding of the psychology of it is it's not the big moments, it's the little moments.
Absolutely.
For the relatedness. That's why spouses that have little conversations and little fights actually do the best, because it's the little things that they bond over. Not like having a baby is monumental for everyone, but it's those little moments that help, those are the strongest relationships.
What makes police work so wonderful? I mean, all people talk about is the negative, the high suicide rate, the high divorce rate, but police also have one of the highest rates of job satisfaction. And it's the relatedness, it's the closeness, it's the camaraderie, like in the military.
And it's tangible. Your impact in the community is tangible.
Absolutely.
And tangible is the wrong word, but you know what I'm saying.
It is. It's tangible and intangible.
And intangible.
It's wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of cops don't like becoming detectives, because it's very slow moving. If you're a uniformed cop on patrol, you see the fruit of your labor right away.
Yeah.
So that can be an adjustment. So we have relatedness, competency to take your skills to show that you were able to get something done. It's a great feeling.
Yeah.
I changed a light fixture last night. I'm very proud of myself. And then autonomy, the ability to carry out tasks without interference in a way you see fit.
Yeah.
I mean, so I don't care what your generation is, but if you see to it your office environment has that, it can be kind of hard to go wrong. There's always exceptions.
Sure.
But that's what I'm always striving for as well.
Yeah, I love it. Well,
and you know, so get back to the 23-year-old who says, well, I'm entitled to all these different things and the such. A lot of it depends on the relationship with their parents. That what we're seeing, the ones who can't respond to the mentorship and the feedback and the tough love is usually determined by whether or not the parents are ready to bail them out.
Yeah. That
whenever I've had someone I've had to give corrective feedback to in that position, if their parents say, well, I'll give you, I'll pay your rent. It's often the ones whose parents say, look, you're going to have to settle this. You're going to have to decide what to do and how to overcome this. I remember I've got two daughters who are just, to me, they're wonderful. One's 24, the other's 21. And they were very active in a Jewish youth group.
Okay.
And one thing I loved about the Jewish youth group, which was a NIFTY, which people know about, is that when they were in leadership positions, if there was a problem or a conflict, the adults would not hop in and fix it. They would listen to them, they might give advice, but they would never directly get involved. Now, this was stressful for them at times, but
again, you're facing adversity early.
And my kids will tell you right now, and they're both very high functioning, that did wonders for them. That did wonders for them. So, we have to give
counterintuitive as a parent, because a parent wants to protect.
Right.
But and that's great advice. And I think you gave advice to the parents of the 23-year-old and the 23-year-old. And I think in interviews, I'm done with resumes. I don't care where you went to college. Give me 3 times you've handled adversity, how you came. Tell me 1 time where you failed and 1 time where you succeeded. If you can't answer that question, you can't be hired here.
Right.
Because again, I care more about the failures. Right. And the most important question after the failure is, did you ever make that mistake again? Okay. Right. And if you did, then that's shame on you. But if you didn't and you learned and it made you better, then it's not a mistake.
It's also good to help with, if you're in the hiring space, we use at our clinic a test called the PXT, which is a job matching test, which really does a very good job of profiling if the person's a good fit or not. For us, because I have to hire clinicians and I'm pulled in a million directions every day between 4 offices, is we put a heavy emphasis on, can the person work autonomously or not?
Yeah.
If the autonomy scores are low, they're not a good fit for our clinic, because you have to be able to work independently, make decisions, and have a check-in once or twice a week.
Yeah.
And pace. We look at pace, too.
It's important.
What kind of pace can they work at?
I'm going to leave it at this, and we'll have a quick answer because we've gone long. But one of the things I've kind of noticed is, the line of power and responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility. Mm-hmm. It seems like most people that I interact with, they love the power. Everyone wants the power, but nobody wants to take the responsibility. No. And one of the easiest ways to separate yourself is to take responsibility, because then smart people will always give you the power. And we do it backwards. We want the power, but we don't want to touch the responsibility. So any thoughts on that as a closing?
One of the best ways to be extremely powerful is to take ownership of something. That if you've made a mistake, own it very fast.
Quickly.
Already begin a mitigation strategy, apologize, and say there's no excuse. I did it. It's my responsibility. And you'll be shocked how well everyone responds to it.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Dave, thank you. This has been
my pleasure. It's been a lot of fun.
I really appreciate it. You've been listening to the Marketing Madmen. We'll catch you next week.
Okay.